Welcome, everyone, to our third in our series on mind and its potential with Venerable Sangye Khadro. Venerable, if you'd like to take it away.
Thank you, Michael. So good evening, everyone. I hope you're all well. Surviving heat, if that's the case in the place where you live. So, as usual, we'll start with some meditation to get a little deeper and better experience of some of the things I was talking about last week. So we'll do a meditation on perception and conception. So I explained those two types of experience that we have, and it's good to look at our mind and try to, see if we can recognize them and recognize the differences between them. And so to make this session as beneficial as possible for as many beings as possible, take a few minutes to bring into your mind a really positive motivation. You may already have one, but in case you don't, in case you haven't had a chance to really think about why you're here tonight, then see if you can bring in as much altruism, concern for others, for the world, understanding that just as we want to be happy, so does everybody else. And just as we don't like suffering and problems, the same is true for everyone else. And try to feel how wonderful it would be if everyone could have the happiness they wish for and be free of the suffering and problems they don't want. And then you can connect that with what we're doing here. We're learning about the mind. And in Buddhism, mind is really important. Mind is actually the source of happiness and suffering. And so the more we can understand our mind and work with our mind, the more we can be happy and have fewer problems. And then we can bring that into our relationships and our interactions with others, so that there's a greater chance we'll be able to help others find greater happiness and peace and well-being as well. So just, using your own thoughts, your own words, see if you can generate some kind of altruistic intention or motivation as your reason for being here. And now I invite you to imagine the Buddha in the space in front of you. So the Buddha is the original teacher of these teachings that we're learning about, what the mind is, how to work with the mind, make it more positive, less negative, and so on. So if you do feel some respect for the Buddha, some aspiration to follow the Buddha's teachings, become like him, develop the same qualities in yourself, then you might want to imagine the Buddha there in front of you, just made of light, transparent, radiant. And then I'll recite the mantra of the Buddha. You can follow along with me if you wish. And while reciting the mantra, you can imagine light, rays of light flowing from the Buddha into you and coming right into your body, filling your body from the top of your head to the tips of your toes and fingertips, filling every part of you, your body and your mind, clearing away any obstructing energy, any negative energy, thoughts, emotions, confusion, and so on, and helping your mind be more clear and in a good state, a good space for what we're going to be doing here in this class. Ayata Om Mune Mune Maha Manaye Soha. Ayata Om Mune Maha Manaye Soha. Ayata Om Mune Maha Manaye Soha. And then just sit quietly for the next few minutes. Try your best to be as relaxed as you can, both physically, free of tightness or tension in your body, as well as mentally. Try not to be thinking about other things that aren't related to what we're doing here. If thoughts do come up in your mind that aren't related to this class, you can just say no, not now, later, put them aside and return your awareness to the present. You can observe your breathing coming in and going out for a few minutes. That's a good way to settle down in the present. Whenever your mind wanders away, you can bring it back to the breath. Just try to stay with each breath as it's coming in and going out. So now let's do some exploration of our experience to see if we can have a better understanding of perception and conception, two ways our mind knows things. So if you have your eyes closed, open them a little bit and just have your gaze directed downwards onto table or your lap, whatever's in front of you. So what do you see with your eyes open? And usually when we have our eyes open, we are focusing on what we see, the objects that we see. But this time, try to do something different. Turn your attention inward to the seer, that which sees, that which has the experience of seeing those objects. And this is our mind. And as we've learned, our mind is not a physical thing. It's non-physical. And it's that which knows, which is aware, which experiences things. See if you can just be aware of awareness itself. And now close your eyes and turn your attention to the sense of hearing. What sounds do you hear? And again, turn away from those sounds, objects that are heard, and see if you can pay attention to that which hears, this inner experience of hearing. We need to zoom again. As I can't get on one side. And now turn to the sense of touch. And pay attention to what you feel with your sense of touch, your tactile sensations. And again, see if you can look inward and notice awareness itself, that which feels those sensations rather than the objects that are felt. So those three types of experience that we have, seeing, hearing, and then feeling tactile sensations, as well as our sense of smell, smelling odors, and taste, tasting tastes. So those are all perceptions. Sense perceptions, they're also known as non-conceptual minds. And this is one way our mind knows things, experiences things. And they're said to be direct. Our mind is having direct experience of the objects that we see, hear, and so on. And now let's explore the other main type of mind, which is conception or thought. So look at thoughts, as well as memories, emotions, like joy or depression, anxiety or contentment, whatever is happening in your mind at the moment. Those experiences are conceptions. They are experienced with our sixth sense, the mental consciousness. And with conceptions, they don't know their objects directly as perceptions do, but rather via a mental image. So there's a mental image of the object that is known rather than the object itself. And to understand this better, bring to mind a person that you know well. And just check if you're able to have a mental image of that person, or like a mental picture of that person, what they look like. And ask yourself if that image is as clear and complete as when you are physically with the person, as if they're right in front of you and you're looking at them. And you can see them with your sense of seeing and hear their voice and so on. So when you're just thinking of the person, having a mental image of the person, is that mental image as clear as when you can see them directly with your eyes? So the answer is probably not. And this is why Buddhist masters consider perception to be preferable to conception, because it experiences things with greater clarity and vividness and in a more complete way. But still, conception or thought is useful because we use it to make plans and remember things we've learned in the past. And it's also an important part of spiritual practice. When we meditate on loving kindness, compassion, or impermanence, various topics in the Lam-Rim, stages of the path, we're using conception. And it enables us to understand these important points more deeply so we can integrate them with our mind and our life and progress along the path. If you could just excuse me for a few minutes, there's some problem here I need to check on. I'll be back as soon as I can. Maybe you can have a little bit of a discussion while I'm away. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so in last week's class, I gave an explanation of these two types of mind, perception and conception. I was wondering if there's any questions you may have about this topic before we move on. Anything that's not clear about perception versus conception? Oh, Cynthia, you want to unmute yourself?
Hi, Venerable Khadro. Thank you for your teaching. I actually had a question about that meditation you just did, if that's okay.
You want to ask about meditation?
No, the meditation that we just did.
Yeah.
So we're talking about like when we were doing the senses and that's direct. It's not conceptual. So that is confusing to me a little bit. So maybe you could explain it further, because when we sense, I'm thinking that our mind interprets that as we receive that through our senses. So then I'm thinking, how can that be direct perception when the mind receives it and then interprets that sense that we're receiving, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying.
Okay, thanks.
So, yeah, I think what actually happens in our experience is that we first have a perception. For example, we see a cat, for example. Okay, we see a cat. And so there's, that initial experience of seeing the cat, but then very quickly, like right away, our mind starts thinking. And I mean, even to say that's a cat, that isn't perception. Perception doesn't have, labels like saying a cat. So as soon as we say that's a cat, and then we have other thoughts like, oh, I like that cat. That cat belongs to so and so, and da 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 da. We have all these thoughts. So that is conception. Yeah. And so realistically, I think what happens in our mind is that our mind kind of switches back and forth between perception and conception very, very, very quickly. And we can even have them at the same time, as I understand. We can actually be looking at the cat and thinking about the cat at the same time. But they are different experiences. You can see that by, for example, like when I asked you to bring to mind a person yeah, someone you know really well, that person might be far away or not right there where you are right now, but you can still be thinking of that person and have a kind of mental image of that person. So that then if we think of that kind of experience, then it's easy to see that's conception, not perception. But when you're with that person, they're standing right in front of you and you're looking at them and talking to them, then at that point, we are having both perceptions, like seeing the person, hearing their voice, maybe touching them, and we're also having conceptions, thinking about them, thinking about what they're saying, thinking about what we're going to say next to them, and having emotions and so on and so forth. So our mind has kind of a mixture of perceptions and conceptions. So what I was trying to do in that meditation was try to, help you differentiate those two kinds of experiences. They are different. And, but even though they happen very, rapidly one after another, so it can be a little hard to distinguish them. But you're right, what you said. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah, so it's like all day long, continuously, our mind is having these experiences, and like perceptions, as long as we have our eyes open, then we're seeing things. And if there are sounds in our environment, we're hearing those sounds. The sense of smell and sense of taste may not be as frequent because there has to be something that we smell or something that we taste. But, even very subtle odors or subtle tastes, like sometimes we just have a taste in our mouth, not when we're eating, but afterwards, there may be an aftertaste, but maybe something quite subtle. And then our sense of touch, feeling sensations in our body. So we're having those experiences like continuously all day long. But it's said that when we go to sleep, then our 5 senses become dormant. They are no longer operating when we are asleep. And when we're asleep, it's only our mental consciousness, the 6th consciousness that is operating and having experiences. And so when we have dreams, then that's our mental consciousness that's having all those movies happening in our mind when we're asleep and dreaming. So that's purely mental consciousness. However, there's a connection between our mental consciousness and our sense consciousness, because after seeing something, then we think about it and we dream about it, right? And so, yeah, it's like the perceptions, our 5 sense perceptions, sort of give information to our mental consciousness that then, generates thoughts and memories and fantasies and also dreams. Yeah. Yeah. So, so I think it's useful to understand that we do have these different types of experience. And as I mentioned, the Buddhist masters usually say that direct perception, is a better kind of experience because it perceives the objects in a more direct way, in a more vivid, clear way. But that doesn't mean conceptions are not worthwhile. You sometimes hear that, like some Buddhist books or Buddhist teachers, they kind of put down conceptions, it's like, we should stop all of our conceptions, get rid of all our conceptions. They're all diluted. And yeah, there's that kind of idea. And in fact, there was this debate long ago in Tibet about this topic, roughly. There's one master from China who was teaching a kind of meditation where you just stop all your thoughts, don't have any thoughts, completely thoughtless meditation. Because he said, all thoughts are diluted, whether they're good thoughts or bad thoughts, all thoughts are diluted. So just get rid of all your thoughts, stop all your thoughts. So this, a lot of people were practicing that meditation and enjoying it. They you probably get a really nice experience, just very peaceful, no thoughts. But then, some people had doubt about it. And so anyway, there was a debate, and one Indian master, Kamalashila, debated with this Chinese master. And Kamalashila was taking the position that, we need thoughts, we need conceptions to be able to generate certain aspects of the path, like compassion and love, and the bodhisattva's practices to generate bodhicitta and practice the 6 perfections and attain enlightenment. We need those. We need to use thought, conception, to generate those aspects of the path. So if we just stop thinking, then how can we possibly follow the path? And so anyway, this is it's considered that he won the debate. And so that view became, at least for some Tibetan schools, that in the Gelugpa school, the one we follow, that view became the accepted one, that yes, we do need to use thought to be able to generate positive ways of thinking, to overcome our delusions, which are negative ways of thinking. And so it's like we have to, meditate on love and compassion and patience to be able to overcome our anger. Our anger and our hatred are not just going to go away by themselves by not thinking. So we have to use thought to overcome them, and also to generate wisdom, to be able to understand the true nature of things. So as long as we're generating positive thoughts, good thoughts, then that's very important to follow the path. But that doesn't mean every single thought is worthwhile. So there's a lot of thoughts that we have that are not very positive, not worthwhile. And I don't know about you, but my mind can just spend lots of time thinking about things that aren't necessarily useful, like worrying and conceptualizing about things. So it doesn't mean any old thought, any old conception is worthwhile, but certain conceptions are important for our spiritual practice, our spiritual development. So that's the view in our school, that it is worthwhile to have conceptions, provided they are positive and correct. And this is actually what I wanted to start talking about tonight, because among conceptions, among our thoughts, there are some that are wrong, they're called wrong conceptions, and others that are correct conceptions. So if we could have the slides, the first slide is looking at that. Okay, so we've looked at conceptions and perceptions, and now we're going to look at wrong ones, meaning they're erroneous, they're incorrect, they're misleading. And so ideally, we want to be able to recognize wrong conceptions and overcome them. Okay, so the first bullet point is talking about correct conceptions. So correct conceptions apprehend their object correctly, as it is. For example, thinking that a rope is a rope, or thinking that sound is impermanent. So these are actually examples found in the Buddhist scriptures, and they'll become more clear if we look at the second bullet point. The second bullet point is saying some conceptions are wrong or erroneous. For example, thinking that a rope is a snake, or thinking that sound is permanent. So this thing about the rope and the snake, if you've listened to lamas teaching or read Buddhist books, you've probably come across this analogy. So they say that if we are outside and it's kind of semi-dark, like maybe the sun has already gone down and it's getting dark, and so we can't see things very clearly, and we're walking along, maybe in the garden, and we see something that's actually a rope. It's a rope, or maybe a hose, and it's sort of, long and narrow, and maybe it has some design on it, and it's coiled up. And because of the darkness, we're not seeing things clearly. We might initially think that it's a snake. Somebody might think that, there's a snake there. And then because of thinking that it's a snake, then they get scared. They're really frightened of snakes. They may get scared. So in reality, there is no snake. It's just a rope that is perceived as a snake. And so the mind is like projecting snake onto something that isn't a snake, and then believing in it as a snake, and then getting emotionally upset about it, scared about it. Okay. So thinking that the rope is a snake, that's an example of a wrong conception. Yeah, that's a wrong conception. And seeing a rope and knowing that it's a rope, having a correct apprehension of it, that's a correct conception. So this analogy is used with the teachings on emptiness, because it's used to illustrate how, like our sense of self, I, me, in fact, there's no inherently existing, objectively existing, real, solid I anywhere within the things that make us up, our body and mind. No such I actually exists. And yet we have this conception that there is that kind of I. We believe there is an I that exists inherently, independently, autonomously, real, solid from its own side. So we have that conception, but that's actually a wrong conception. We're misapprehending ourselves. Okay, and so it's similar to misapprehending the rope and thinking that it's actually a snake, and then getting all emotional about it. In a similar way, we're misapprehending our body and mind, our aggregates, and thinking there's a real I somewhere inside, when in fact that doesn't exist. So that's a little hard to understand, the misconception about our I. So using that analogy of the rope and the snake can help us understand how it is possible to misapprehend, misconceive, mistake the existence of something, and then get emotional about it. And the other example about sound being impermanent, there was maybe there still is an Indian school of philosophy that believed the sound to be permanent, particularly the sound of the Vedas. The Vedas are scripture, very ancient holy scriptures. And so this school believed that the sound of the Vedas was something permanent and unchanging. And so, that view, that idea that sound is impermanent, is a misconception, because sound is not permanent, it's impermanent. And so that's, again, an example that's often used in the Buddhist scriptures. So we may not have that view of sound being permanent, but we may have other views about permanence, like thinking I am permanent. Yeah, even though we may not admit that. But when we check our sense of self, our sense of who we are, how we exist, yeah, we probably have this sense that we're going to exist forever. Yeah, we're never going to go out of existence. It's actually very difficult to conceive of ourselves as going out of existence, disappearing from this world. But that is definitely going to happen. We're all going to disappear from this world one day. But that's hard for us to understand, to conceive, to accept. So we probably have a sense of I being permanent, lasting forever. And that's, again, a wrong conception, a misconception. Whereas thinking that sound is impermanent, thinking that I am impermanent, thinking my body is impermanent, thinking that my friends, my loved ones, they are impermanent. These are correct conceptions. These are correct ones. Okay. So that's with conception. So we can divide conceptions into those that are correct. That means they are in accordance with reality. These are conceptions, ideas, notions that accord with reality, with how things are. Whereas wrong conceptions are those that are contrary to how things are. Yeah. So I was thinking about how, yeah, this, because of all, social media, and, people can invent ideas and then put them out there on social media and the internet, and they can spread very wide and far, and people can believe in them. This is what we call conspiracy theories. So there's probably a lot of wrong conceptions flying around. I don't know. I heard about this group called, is it QAnon? QAnon. I don't know if they're still around. Are they still around? Are they still existing? Yeah. Okay. I don't pay attention. I don't do social media, but yeah, I just heard about some of the, apparently it was just some guy or maybe just a few people who create these ideas, like something is going to happen, and they put it out there, and all these people read it and believe it, and they really think, oh, this thing is going to happen, and then it doesn't happen. Yeah, so there's probably a lot of those flying around these days, wrong conceptions. That's really sad. That it's so easy to induce wrong conceptions in other people, and I do sometimes read about these. I think there's sometimes Christian ministers who announce that the world is going to end on a certain date. Yeah. And they'll even ask all their followers to come to the church on that date, give away all their things, and come to the church and be in the church when the world ends, and be praying and so on and so forth. So this happens. All these people come to the church, and then, the world doesn't end. But they've already given away all their money. And anyway, it's like very strange. So those are, again, examples of wrong conceptions, thinking the world is going to end. Like some years ago, it was 2012. A lot of people believed that the world was going to end in 2012. There was even a movie about it. Yeah. Well, that was already 12 years ago. We're still here. Yeah. Well, those are, some modern day contemporary examples of wrong conceptions, collective wrong conceptions. And there's probably a lot more as well. And then with regard to perceptions, that other way of knowing, there are also some that are correct and some that are wrong. So for most of us, according to Geshe Rabten anyway, he says most of our perceptions are correct. For example, if we see green as green, or we see rabbit ears as ears, see a rabbit with the ears sticking up, and we recognize those are ears. But it's also possible to have wrong perceptions. For example, seeing green as red. This is what was happening in the conversation before we started. That some people are colorblind, I had a friend, who said they would see something green as red or something red as green. And so this can happen. That's a wrong perception. Or seeing a rabbit's ears as horns. So that's another example that is found in the Buddhist scriptures. It must have been once upon a time, some guy or some person saw a rabbit maybe in the distance, and the ears were sticking up. Maybe his vision wasn't working very well. And he said, "Oh, look, there's a rabbit with horns." He thought those were horns on the head of the rabbit. And so that's an example of a misperception, a wrong perception. And we probably, yeah, I think we all have those sometimes. For example, seeing a reflection in a mirror as something real. Yeah. So I once had this experience. I was leading a retreat in a particular place, and during a break, I walked into the restroom to use the restroom, and then I had this instant perception of another nun. And I thought, oh, how nice. There's another nun here. I'm not the only nun. That was my initial reaction. And then, within a couple of seconds, I realized that it was just a mirror, like the, full length mirror on the wall. And I saw my own reflection, but thought it was another nun. Have you ever had experiences like that? You go to a place that you've never been before and you don't realize that there's a huge mirror maybe covering the entire wall, and you think that what you see in the mirror is something real. And then you realize, oh no, that's just a mirror reflecting things back. So that's one example that often happens of a wrong perception, seeing that something that is just a reflection in a mirror, but thinking it's a real thing, not just a reflection. And then another one is an echo. If you're in a cave or a very large empty building and you talk or yell, and then another voice answers, you might initially think there's another person. It sounds like another person answering you, but then you realize, no, it's just an echo. Another example I thought of would be phantom limbs. I've heard of that phenomena. Person who has had a body part, like, their hand or their arm or leg, or it's been amputated, so it's actually not there anymore. And yet they continue to have sensations as if it's there. They continue to feel their hand or their arm, even though that hand isn't there anymore, that arm isn't there anymore. Have you heard of that? Phantom limbs, they call it phantom limbs. I thought that could be another example of a wrong perception with regard to our tactile sense, body sense. So anyway, this is another way of, looking at our mind and our experiences. Some of our experiences are correct and accurate and in accordance with reality, but some of them are wrong. And this is particularly important for our spiritual path, our spiritual practice, because the last bullet point says mental afflictions like anger, attachment, ignorance, and so on are examples of wrong conceptions. Okay, so you're probably familiar with the Buddhist teaching about the source of suffering, the source of problems, where all our problems, our suffering, our difficulties come from. According to Buddhism, the root of all our suffering and problems is our afflictions, these aspects of our mind, which are conceptions. They're conceptual minds. They're not perceptions. They're conceptions. So they're that type of experience. And they are wrong ones. That means they're not seeing things accurately. They're seeing things in an erroneous way, in a distorted way, other than how they really are. And so this is why it is important to learn about conceptions, because we have within our mind examples of wrong conceptions, erroneous conceptions, and they come up probably many times every day. We have feelings of anger, irritation, annoyance, aversion. We have feelings of attachment, desire, grasping, clinging. Maybe we have jealousy, we have arrogance, and of course, ignorance, especially ignorance about our own I, our own sense of self, I, me. And so these pop up in our mind again and again every day. And it's because of these in our mind that we have suffering and problems. And if we aspire to become free of our problems, as the Buddha taught, it is possible to attain a state of freedom, liberation, and even a state of enlightenment. These are the main things we need to work on to reduce and eventually overcome, get rid of altogether. And so that's why it's useful to understand conceptions, what conceptions are, because, yeah, that's like our main work, our main job is working on those. Michael, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, you said if we have wrong conceptions or wrong preceptions, compared to how things really are, is that true both inherently and in non-inherent existence?
What do you mean?
Well, I guess when you say as opposed to how things really are, I mean, are you talking about how when you say how things really are you talking about inherent existence, how I inherently see things, or how things really are because I don't have the right perception? Because most of my perceptions are incorrect because things aren't really as they seem.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's different levels of misperceptions and misconceptions that we have. And the very deepest one, the main one that our teachers are always talking about, is that we see things as inherently existing. And in fact, things are empty of inherent existence. And so, yeah, we see ourselves, we see other people, other beings, and all the things in the world around us. Everything appears to us as if it's inherently existing. And our mind tends to just buy into that appearance. We buy into that, we believe in it, we go along with it. And so that's the deepest, main mistake that our mind makes, wrong conceptions. And and so with our perceptions as well, it's said that we even perceiving things, they appear inherently existing. So we are perceiving things incorrectly all the time. That's the deepest one, but that is more difficult to deal with. But there are also other wrong conceptions that we have, like the wrong conception of permanence, where in fact, things are impermanent, but we don't see them as impermanent, and instead we see them as permanent. And, grasp at them, adhere to them as if they were permanent. So that's also a wrong conception, and not seeing things accurately as they are. So there's actually many wrong conceptions. And another one is seeing things that are actually unsatisfactory or suffering, seeing them as pleasurable and satisfying, like samsara, for example. Okay, so all the things in samsaric phenomena, we tend, not all the things, but the pleasant things, the pleasant aspects of samsara, we tend to believe that they are wonderful and fantastic and worth being attached to, when in fact, they are not satisfactory. They are in the nature of dukkha, or unsatisfactoriness. So that's another misconception that we have. So there's quite a few of these misconceptions that we that affect our mind and affect our life and our way of being. Is that what you were asking?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. And actually, I was gonna, next slide, just give an example of one of our afflictions, because ignorance about, ignorance that sees things as inherently existing, that is something rather subtle and difficult to work with, difficult to recognize. But an easier one is anger. Okay, so let's look at the example of anger and see how there are wrong conceptions involved in when we're angry at somebody. Okay. So first bullet point, when you are angry at another person, do you see yourself correctly as you really exist? Okay. So I think for all of us, there are moments when, there's anger in our mind. We're feeling anger, hatred, or even just a low level feeling like irritation, dislike, aversion. Okay. So when we have that kind of attitude towards someone else, most of our attention is on the other person, like, what that person has done, what that person has said, why we don't like them, and so on. But what about the I, the sense of I, who feels this way, who feels anger, who has all those kinds of thoughts? So when we're angry, the sense of I is usually very strong. It feels kind of very solid and real. And usually we don't question our sense of I. We don't ask ourselves, well, does this I really exist the way it appears? Unless our Buddhist teacher is telling us to contemplate that. But just when we're on our own, having our own experiences, we usually don't question that sense of an I. We just go along with it. We believe in it. We buy into it. But if we could turn our attention away from the person that we're angry at and turn our attention to our sense of self, or I, that is feeling angry and having these angry thoughts. One thing we might notice is that this sense of I seems really, really important, like more important than the other person, maybe even more important than everyone else and everything else, like the most important person in the world. Yeah. The center of everything, the center of the world. And there's probably also a sense of being right. Yeah. My way of seeing things, my way of thinking, my views, my judgments are correct. And everyone who agrees with me, they are correct too. But anyone who doesn't agree with me, well, they're wrong. There's probably a strong sense of being self-righteous. Yeah, I am right. And I want everyone to agree with me. And if anyone were to question our views, our judgments, challenge us, we'd probably just get more angry, more defensive. Have you had that experience before? And have you ever had the experience of being in that situation of feeling really angry at somebody or really angry about something and feeling completely right? Yeah, I am right. And then later you find out that actually you were wrong, that your way of thinking, what you thought was actually incorrect. Yeah, have you ever had that experience? I heard this, story from one man, and yeah, he was quite remarkable. He said that he's a real estate salesperson, and he thought that another real estate person, another like a colleague, had cheated him out of a deal that he was trying to sell one house, and this other guy managed to sell the house. So he felt he was cheated by that guy. And he said he was so angry at that other guy. He even had thoughts of murdering. He had thoughts of committing a murder. And he was just bad mouthing that person. Whenever he had a chance, he'd say really negative things about that person. And he went to see a psychologist because he was actually worried that he might actually act out these thoughts of killing them. He didn't want to do that and end up in prison. And the psychologist advised him to learn meditation. So he found his way to a Buddhist group and started meditating, and that really helped him to calm down and work with his anger. And then sometime later, he found out that he was actually wrong about this person. He completely misunderstood the situation, and it wasn't at all the case that this person had cheated him out of a deal. And so that was such a lesson for him. He almost committed a murder on the basis of a misunderstanding, a misconception. Yeah, so probably none of us have had such a dramatic experience like that, but we've probably all had some experiences where we were really convinced that we were right about something, and then we had the rug pulled out from under us and found out, no, we were wrong. We misunderstood, whatever. Yeah. And then we probably feel very embarrassed, ashamed of ourselves. Yeah. Barbara, did you want to ask a question?
I was actually just going to make a comment because what you described, it wasn't as bad as the realtor. My experience recently, but at the end of it, what really struck me is how awful and yucky I felt.
How awful?
Yeah, and yucky I felt about it. Because that's not my true nature.
Yeah.
And it just really did not feel good.
Yeah. Well, that's good that you felt that way. I mean, it's good to recognize that these emotions come up in our mind, and they can sometimes just take over our mind, and they make us blind. They make us kind of crazy. We're not really thinking clearly. But don't beat yourself up about it. It happens to everybody. We all have experiences like that. And it's good to then say, okay, now I can see very clearly the disadvantages of delusions, afflictions, and how they can mess up my mind and even mess up my life, my relationships. So then we can make a determination, not just feel bad and beat yourself up, but just make the determination, I really must work on my mind and free my mind from these afflictions because they're so harmful. So try to learn that lesson from that kind of experience. So anyway, the sense of self or I, when we're feeling angry or some other affliction, that can seem really, really strong. And it's good to, to try to explore that. What exactly is that self? Does it exist the way it appears? Do I really know myself? Do I really understand myself correctly? So that's one thing we can investigate. And then secondly, the second point is, do you see the other person correctly or in an exaggerated way, like 100% bad? So Buddhism says that not only do we see ourselves as something real and solid and inherently existing, but we also see the other person that way too. We see there's a real, solid, inherently existing bad person over there that I can't stand, that drives me crazy. Okay, so we're also seeing that person incorrectly, and it's difficult to recognize this misconception about inherent existence. That's something really subtle. But one thing that might be easier to recognize is if we just ask ourselves, well, what is my mind saying about that person? And if you can do that, if you can step back and look at what your mind is saying about that person, you might notice that your mind is saying that person is 100% bad, is completely bad. They don't have any good qualities at all. They don't do anything right. Yeah. Have you ever noticed that? It's actually helpful to recognize that and then do a reality check. Ask yourself, is that really true? Is that person really, is anybody really 100% bad without any good qualities, never does anything right? Is anyone like that? Yeah. I really like this quotation that I heard from Mother Teresa. She said, there are no bad people. There are only good people who do bad things. And I really believe that. I really think that's true. Nobody is 100% bad. We all mess up sometimes. We all get deluded and caught up in wrong conceptions, and then we act them out and we do stupid things, bad things. Everyone's like that. But if you were to look carefully at a person who has done bad things, and if you watch them all the time, like 24 hours a day, you'd probably see that, well, they're not doing bad things constantly 24 hours a day. Sometimes they're doing good things. They probably have friends. They may have, a partner, a spouse, kids, pets that they show affection for. They're kind to, they help. They do good things. I'm sure that you would see positive things in that person if you looked very carefully and objectively. And so, yeah, if you can just recognize that, how your mind is exaggerating, and this is actually what is said with anger, that our mind exaggerates the negative qualities of the person, painting them as 100% bad. And as if that's how they are all the time. And so the next bullet point says, if they were truly as bad as you think, then everyone else should see them that way too. And is that the case? So this is another way we can sort of check our mind and what our mind is saying and see if it's true or not. So we tend to, with someone we dislike, someone we're angry at, we tend to think they're 100% bad, and that's how they are from their own side over there. Inherently, they're like that. And if that really was the case, everyone else would see them that way too. If they really were like that from their own side, inherently, intrinsically, everybody would see them that way. So it's good to check that and see, does everyone else see them that way? And probably not. Yeah, there's always at least some people who like a person, even someone like a criminal, even a gangster, even a terrorist, a murderer. There's always at least one or two people who like that person. For example, their mother, right? Mothers always love their children, no matter what their children do. You hear these stories about criminals who committed many murders and they're in prison, and their mother continues visiting them, caring about them, being concerned about them. So the mother can see positive things in that person. They know that person isn't 100% bad. So that's something else we can investigate to check. Yeah, if there are people who are able to see positive things in that person, see good qualities in that person, then that can soften our view. That can help us have a softer view towards that person and think, well, maybe they're not that bad as I think. And then the next bullet point, and you yourself would always see them in that way. Is that the case or not? So if the person was really 100% bad and didn't have anything good about them, then in your own experience, you would always see them that way. And is that the case? Or can you think of times when you didn't think the person was so bad? Maybe you even liked them. Maybe you even had good feelings for them. I had this experience once when I was working in one Dharma center, and one member of the committee who looked after the administrative parts of the center, this person had certain behaviors that I sometimes got annoyed at. And there was one time when, she was behaving in a way, talking in a way that just really pushed my buttons. And I felt so angry at her. And then, I was able to look at that anger and recognize that actually there's been times when she was really kind to me, really helpful to me. We had good times together. But I could see that when I was angry at her, it's almost like all those good times, all those good experiences were just completely pushed out of my mind. Like, I ignored those, I forgot those, and I was only focused on, this one kind of behavior that she had that was so annoying to me. So this is what happens when we're feeling angry. It's like we just kind of ignore or even deny anything good about the person or any good experiences we may have had with them, any kindness they may have shown to us, any good things they may have done to us. It's like all of that stuff, it's almost like we're ignoring those things and only focusing on the few things that we're annoyed about. Have you ever noticed that? Anyway, something to look at, something to consider. What I'm trying to do here is point out how when we have anger, when there's anger in our mind, that's an example of a wrong conception, meaning we are not seeing things accurately, correctly as they are, but we're seeing things in a distorted way, especially the person we're angry at. Now, we're not looking at them in a realistic way. We're seeing them in a distorted way. And so if we can recognize that, even if we're not able to fully clear up the mistakes right away, but just to recognize, oh, the way my mind is working right now, the way my mind is thinking about this person, seeing this person, is not really correct. It's not really accurate. So that can help us to sort of distance ourselves from our anger, those angry thoughts and feelings, and say, no, I don't want to follow this. I don't want to buy into this. This is not helpful. This is not even correct. I don't know how about you, but for me, this is one really helpful way of working with anger. There's a lot of methods, tools, strategies for working with anger, but I find it really helpful just to recognize how, anger is not accurate. It's not seeing things correctly, accurately. It's seeing things in a distorted way. So why do I want to believe in it? Why do I want to believe what anger is telling me? It's like lying to me. It's like cheating me. It's like a scam. It's not something to believe in, not something to trust, but something to say, no, I'm not going to follow this. So then in conclusion, what we can do with this is, are the thoughts, the conceptions that you have about the person you're angry at really correct, or are they erroneous? Any questions about that? So anyway, I hope what I said makes sense, that we have these two aspects of our mind, two ways of knowing. One is perception and one is conception. And sometimes our perceptions and conceptions are correct and accurate. They're seeing things correctly, but other times they're seeing things incorrectly. And so we need to watch out for that and not just blindly believe whatever our mind is saying to us. Because sometimes we're seeing things incorrectly. And so, yeah, later we will return to this topic of afflictions. That was one of the things that we need to look at in this course, working with our, at least starting, and this is a huge subject, but we can at least start looking at our afflictions, which are wrong conceptions, and how to work with them. But I did want to start, we won't be able to get too far into this, but to start looking at another way of dividing mind, another twofold division of minds, meaning, you know, different aspects of our experience. And this is into main minds and mental factors. And this is also related to afflictions, because afflictions are types of mental factors. So a main mind, which is also, sometimes it's translated as primary mind. I put the Tibetan term, so some main mind. So this is an awareness that knows the mere entity or mere presence of an object. Okay. So the role of a main mind is just to know that there's an object there. It doesn't go into details about the object. It doesn't, you know, relate to the object in any kind of detailed way. It's just the mere presence of the object. And there are 6 types of main minds related to our 6 senses, or 6 types of consciousness: seeing, hearing, smelling, and so on. Mental factors they apprehend various features of the object and affect the way the mind apprehends the object. So mental factors, there's many different mental factors, and each of them has a different job or role or function in the way that they relate to the object. So one example of a mental factor is feeling. Feeling is a mental factor. So what feeling does is it experiences the object as either pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. Okay, so there's just, it said there are just those 3 types of feelings. It's like a very basic way of responding to the object that can then lead to attachment to whatever we find pleasant, aversion to whatever we find unpleasant, and then perpetuating ignorance towards whatever we feel neutral about. So that's just one example of a mental factor, but we'll look later at some other examples of mental factors. And then the 3rd bullet point says, mind and mental factors always arise together and never separately. A main mind can't exist on its own without mental factors, and vice versa. Mental factors can never exist on their own without a main mind. So they always come together in a package. There's like a package that consists of a main mind and then a number of mental factors. So there's an example, last bullet point. When we see a flower, say you go out into the garden and you see a very beautiful rose. So when we have that experience of seeing the flower, that experience consists of one main mind, which in this case is an eye consciousness. It's a visual perception. And then there are several mental factors together with it, as if in one package. They come together in one package. So what this means is each moment of our mind, each moment of our experience is a is a composite, you could say, a complex experience that consists of a number of different aspects, a number of different factors, always one main mind plus several mental factors. And on the next slide, if you turn to the next slide, yeah, I thought it might be helpful to have a drawing. Each instance of mind, each moment of mind, each experience consists of one main mind and then several mental factors, at least 5. There's a minimum of 5 mental factors. There could be more, but there couldn't be less. There's always at least 5 mental factors that go with each main mind. And don't take this drawing seriously, because mind is not something physical. So it doesn't have shape or color. Yeah, it doesn't have any physical properties at all. And so we can't really know how the mind and the mental factors fit together. Yeah, they don't fit together in a physical way. But I just try to, convey some idea, some experience of how a moment of mind, and if we could take one moment of experience and put it under a microscope, look at it, dissect it, then this is what we would find. We would find, there's actually a number of different things involved there. One main mind, like seeing or hearing or thinking, and then several mental factors that go with it. So I think we've kind of run out of time. I was going to talk a little bit more about that, but we'll continue next week. We'll look at the 6 types of main minds and then some of the mental factors, just to have a better idea. Okay. So mind is something very complex in Buddhism. And here in this course, we're just looking at it in a sort of brief way, but there's also a course that's part of the basic program, so I'm sure it's also offered at Tupten Norbu Ling, and it's in Tibetan, it's called Lorik, and so I'm not sure how it's translated, but mind and awareness. And it goes into much more depth, much more detail about the mind, different types of mind and mental factors as well. So we're just looking at this in a very rough way and not details. Any questions before we finish? William, you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, well, you may want to cover this next week, but in terms of the definition of main mind, I'm curious, is the main mind awareness that you say it's awareness that knows the mere entity or mere presence of an object? Would you say that awareness is correct? And then any problems that get added to the mix are through the mental factors that misinterpret or misapprehend the true essence of that object?
Yeah, that is correct. That if, like in the case of a wrong perception or a wrong conception, what causes that particular mind to be wrong or erroneous would be mental factors. However, like for example, when we're thinking about somebody we're angry at, okay, we're thinking about a person we don't like, or have a mental image of that person, and so there's anger. Anger is one of the mental factors. It's one of the afflictive mental factors. So if anger is present, if anger is part of that mind that's thinking about that person, then that is causing that whole mind to become distorted. Okay. So so if anger is present with the mind, or some other delusion is present with the mind, then it's not that the main mind would also be distorted, would also be erroneous. But what makes it erroneous is the presence of anger. So it's the presence of a mental factor that causes that whole experience to be erroneous. And so it is said that maybe I'll talk about this next time. It's a little complicated, but yeah, the main minds, it's mainly the mental factors that affect the main mind and cause it to be either correct or erroneous or happy or unhappy or whatever. So yeah, they are the ones that mainly affect the experience that we have.
Thank you.
Good question. Thank you. So we'll stop there for tonight and carry on next week. And again, if you have any questions that come up between now and then, you can email them to the center, and Dundrup will send them to me, and I'll try to answer them next time. Okay, so let's just take a few moments to make a mental dedication of the positive energy we've created here tonight. So we started off with a good motivation, a good state of mind, wanting to be of benefit to ourselves and to others, as many people as possible. And then listening to these teachings, which came from the Buddha, and they're for the purpose of helping us have a better mind, a mind that is more positive, more happy, joyful, and flourishing, and more positive towards others, able to benefit others. And so it's really valuable material that we're learning about. And so we've created some good energy, positive energy from our time together tonight. So let's mentally share this energy with others, wishing that it will help all other beings to understand their minds better, so they can have greater happiness and peace and fewer problems. And that we can all learn to live with each other with more love and compassion and kindness and hopefulness, and less likely to do things that are harmful to ourselves and others. Okay, thank you for joining. Thank you, Michael, for facilitating.